All right, thanks for staying with us on Good Morning Nigeria. And just before we begin the conversation on the steel sector, let's take this background report to launch us into the discourse.
The inception of Bola Ahmed Tinubu as the President of Nigeria saw the unbundling of the Ministry of Mines and Steel Development, birthing the Ministry of Steel Development. This is believed to give direction to the sector with the hope of becoming the bedrock of industrialization of Nigerian economy, especially in manufacturing and unlocking the natural resource potentials of the country. The minister had once revealed that Nigeria spent $8 billion on importation of steel annually into the country. Hence, the need to revive the Ajaokuta Steel Company remains imminent. As at today, Nigeria still relies on imports to meet up production capacity of 2.2 billion tons of steel, estimating more than $3 billion. Experts have identified some factors affecting the growth of the steel industry to include inflation, economic instability, geopolitical disturbances, lack of skilled personnel, and chain supply issues, amongst others. Now, with these, how has the ministry fared in the last 1 year, especially in tackling some of these challenges? Guests will be talking about that and more as they examine the steel development in the last 1 year.
All right, Oyemi Ajayi, thank you for the background report. Once again, welcome if you've just joined in. And our conversation is appraising the 1 year of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu's administration. And this morning we are focusing on the Ministry of Steel Development. And we have right here with us in the studio the Honorable Minister of Steel Development, Shuaibu Abubakar Audu. And it's a pleasure to have you right here with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Claire, for having me.
Also here with us is a very familiar face, someone who would help us, of course, put all the technical, terminologies into perspectives for us to understand. Dr. Meka Ukengo, and he's a member, National Technical Working Group, Mining, Agriculture and Water Resources Vision 2020 Committee. He is also an external consultant on the review of the technical audit of Ajaokuta Steel Plant and NIMCO, and of course, former national strategy consultant to the World Bank on the mining sector in Nigeria. And it's always a delight to have you with us on Good Morning Nigeria.
It's a privilege to be here. Thank you. Good morning.
Right, and we have also been joined from Okene via Zoom by Alhaji Shuaibu Musa, Pioneer Deputy General Manager, Ajaokuta Steel Company. Good to have you join us.
Thank you very much.
Right, and also via Zoom from Lagos, we have been joined by Professor David Esezobo, Professor of Extractive Metallurgy and Zero Waste Technology, former head of Department of Metallurgical and Materials Engineering at the University of Lagos. It's a pleasure to welcome you, Prof.
Thank you very much. It's also a pleasure to be here.
All right, gentlemen, thank you once again. Let's, in our usual format, we'll take the minister first, and then before we expand the conversation to our other guests here in the studio. So, Honorable Minister, thank you very much for joining us. And let's look at the steel development sector. That's one sector that, analysts consider whatever you need to do there, it's not something you do in a very short term. Usually it takes a long time to fix, but within the 100 days of this administration, I'm sure there are potential that could have been addressed. Can you share that with us?
Yes, first of all, thank you very much, Claire and Victor, for having me here. Nice and early this morning, and
we're sorry.
And I'd like to. No, I'm used to it as an investment banker. I usually get up, 5, 6 a.m. in the morning. I'm up and about. First of all, just to mention that steel is the bedrock of any nation's development. If gotten right, it has led many countries to their industrial revolution, and Nigeria is no exception. In fact, Nigeria is at the recipe of something very great, where we can have both an industrial revolution and an information technology revolution at the same time. We would be the first country in Africa to go through that cycle. Mr. President, under the Renewed Hope agenda, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, under his Renewed Hope agenda, created the Ministry of Steel Development in August 2023. For the first time since our independence in 1960, a steel sector was carved out under the ministry, and is a statement of intent and a statement showing political will. Mr. President's plan is to grow the Nigerian economy to over $1 trillion by the end of the second term of his administration, by the special grace of God, in 2031. And certain measures have to be in place. If you look at the 20th biggest economy in the world right now, Switzerland is just over 920 billion dollars. So Mr. President has looked at the global situation and knows that if we get the steel sector right, we could become a G20 economy within 8 years. So Mr. President must be given credit. And he has continued to show that he means business for Nigeria, and he wishes Nigerians well. So if you look at some of the difficult decisions that have been taken, they are difficult decisions, but it's in the best interest of Nigeria to prevent Nigeria from a cataclysmic collapse, where we were cash-strapped for many, many years, and we didn't have the resources to pay for subsidy or to continue to liberalize our FX regime. So those changes have been put in place. Now, moving back into the steel sector, the president has given us two mandates. One is to revitalize the Ajokuta Steel Complex, as well as the National Iron Ore Mining Company, NIOMCO. The second is to revitalize the entire steel industry. So these are two big mandates. And I'll come back to your question on what we have done in the first 1 year. For lack of a better word, the low-hanging fruits to address some of the desires of Mr. President. In terms of Ajokuta and NIOMCO, we have done about 4 or 5 things. The first thing that we've done is we're in the final stages of raising 35 billion naira, around 25 million dollars, from a local financial institution to restart the light steel mill of the Ajokuta Steel Complex. Ajokuta has about 44 production plants, sitting on about 24,000 hectares of land. If you put it in perspective, it's about the size of Abuja. So it's very, very massive. The president has given his personal approval. He gave me an approval to raise the capital locally. So we've put the measures in place. We're in the final stages. I've done a cover letter to the Minister of Finance with the final offer letter from the financial institution, so that we can go through the process of securing the facility. Yesterday, at the sidelines of the commissioning of the Abuja Metro rail line, I had a conversation with the Minister of Finance, Mr. Wale Edun, and he's very much on board in terms of Mr. President's desire to transform the steel industry. So that's one of the things that we're doing. That is a low-hanging fruit which we're going to address within the shortest possible time. The second thing that we've done is we have drafted a memorandum of understanding, an MOU, with the Ministry of Defense. I have had several conversations with the Minister of State for Defense, Governor Metawale, who's in charge of DICON, Defense Industry Corporation of Nigeria, where the DICON Act was recently enacted by President Tinubu so that they can be local content. So that DICON Act ensures or stipulates that military hardwares, a large component of military hardwares, must be produced locally. Ajokuta has all the facilities to meet those objectives. So we're putting those measures in place to ensure that, whether it's helmets, whether it's bullets, whether it's vests, whether it's components for ships or cars or tanks, military tanks. All of that can be done within the confines of Ajaokuta. We have the National Methodological Development Center in Jos that has the component of lead and zinc that is a major component for production of those military hardwares that can be deployed to Ajaokuta, as well as the other mineral resources that are available in Ajaokuta to get those things done. The third thing that we're looking to do is to revive the power plant. Ajaokuta has a 110 megawatt power plant. The power plant can supply electricity and power to Ajaokuta Steel Complex, but beyond that, it can also provide some power to the national grid. Because of the paucity of finance, we're thinking outside the box to ensure that we can get a PPP arrangement where we can securitize the cash flows that will come in from selling, if the power plant is revived, the funding that we'll get from selling the power to the national grid can be securitized and used as the equity for the PPP arrangement that will bring in the capital. And we're talking to about 3 major power holding companies which are going to assist us to do that. The fourth thing that we're looking to do, which should have been number 1, is we're talking to the OEM, which is the original equipment manufacturers, which are the Russians. But not just the Russians. We have other interested parties, whether it's the Chinese or the Arabs, that have shown desire to come and help us to revive Ajaokuta, the entire complex. What is required in terms of the capital that is required is about $2 billion US, a lot of money. But the consortium that we're working with has to have a Nigerian component so that they can upscale Nigerians, their skill set, build the technical expertise, so that one day, ultimately, if we go through with the concession process, at the end of the concession arrangement, it goes back to a Nigerian entity or Nigerian entities, depending on the capacity of those Nigerian companies to be able to run it. But $2 billion US is about 3 trillion naira. Not a lot of, in fact.
At the current rate?
Yeah, at the current rate, correct. So I would say that, Nigerian companies don't have the financial muscle to be able to help us to revive it. But we can think outside the box, work with a consortium that incorporates a Nigerian entity that would help us to achieve those desires. The last thing under the first point is, under the first point of reviving Ajaokuta and Niomco is the desire to set up an industrial park within the Ajaokuta territory. Remember, I mentioned that it sits on 24,000 hectares of land. We can set up an industrial park where all the major steel players in Nigeria, but not just in Nigeria, across the West African sub-region, can coalesce in the Ajaokuta axis. We would work with the Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investments to create an economic zone that would have some benefits that would encourage players to come into that region. Ajaokuta has a gas pipeline from Itakpe from Warri to Ajaokuta. It has a rail line. It has facilities for deep sea port that needs to be dredged. There are mineral resources available. So everything that is required to get the steel industry to bounce back is available in Ajaokuta. And Mr. President has looked into all of this and has used his initiative and his desire to ensure that turnaround, which was the primary reason why he created the Ministry of Steel Development. Maybe I'll wait till the second section to talk about...
But these are your KPI areas.
Yes, these are my KPI areas.
Yes,
correct.
but what are there data, maybe to let us know if we've made any increase, any impact, for instance, the Daikon Act, which is very, fundamental. I mean, to boost local, utilization of steel and manufacturing. Yes. Is there anything that has been done to boost that or to activate that?
Yes, the government, the federal government is a bureaucracy, right? Nigerians are in a hurry for change, and rightly so. We are all in a hurry for things to get better. Mr. President is in a hurry for Nigeria to get better, and we all want Nigeria to get better. We're going through the process. Haven't signed the DICON Act into law. Like I mentioned, I have had series of discussions with the Minister of State for Defense, as well as even the Minister of Defense himself, Alhaji Badaru, Governor Badaru. And I'm talking to both of them. We're talking to local defense producers, local players that are producing equipment that have the capacity to help us in partnership with the arrangement that we have in place to do all of that. Then the other thing that is very important is what we are doing for the entire steel industry. I think it's very important to let Nigerians know what we are doing. We're doing about 4 or 5 things. One is we have written an internal 10-year roadmap for the revival of the steel industry. And we have also written a 3-year internal roadmap for the revival of Ajokuta and Nyomko. Now we need to take it a step further. We need to bring in consultants that would have an industry stakeholder meeting, right? Which would also look at the steel activities across the African region, whether it's Egypt or South Africa, or even beyond that, India, China that produces over 1 billion metric tons of liquid steel per annum, and Russia that built the Ajokuta steel plant for us to learn from. I've engaged with the World Bank to try to raise up to $5 million in terms of funding for the roadmap. The second thing that we're looking to do, we want to enact 3 bills to provide a regulatory framework for the industry. One is the methodological industry bill. It has passed the 2nd reading. I'm in touch with the National Assembly. There are some amendments that are being recommended by myself and by ministry to the National Assembly, which will be done in the shortest possible time. The second thing is the National Steel Council Act that needs to be also amended to reflect today's reality in Nigeria. And the third thing is, the third act is the Methodological Training Institute Bill. So in the second point, those are the 3 acts that needs to be reviewed. The third thing that needs to be done is we need to put the entire scrap industry. In Nigeria, the scrap industry is quite big.
It's quite huge.
In fact, a ton of scrap, I understand, is about $5,000. So it's a significant amount of money. So we can have a process where the scrap industry in Nigeria is regulated. If you go on the shores of Lagos, I lived in Lagos for 20 years while I was in investment banking. And while I was in Lagos, sometimes when you go on the high seas, you see ships that have been deserted on the high seas for many years or even decades. Those are critical raw materials for the scrap industry. If we have a sort of a framework, a regulatory framework that can help us to guide that industry, that would help us. 2 more things before I close. One is or the 4th thing is that we also need to explore or continue to put measures in place to explore raw materials for the development of the steel industry. And we're working very, very closely with the National Steel Raw Materials Exploration Agency in Kaduna. And then lastly, the last thing I'll mention is that we're creating the right environment for foreign investments to come into Nigeria. So, Mr. President, at the sidelines of the G20 summit in New Delhi, India, in September 2023, reached an agreement with Jindal Steel, one of the biggest steel companies in the world, to invest $5 billion in setting up a 5 million metric ton steel plant in Nigeria. I was also in China on the 1st of January this year with the Minister of Defense, Alhaji Badaru, and we met with the senior executives of the Luan Steel Group. They have also committed to investing about $3 billion in setting up a 3 million metric ton steel plant in Nigeria. And then the Ajokuta were looking to raise about 2 billion, like I mentioned, with various parties. If you string all these things together, there's a potential pipeline of over 10 billion US dollars in foreign direct investments that could come into Nigeria, which will be a game changer for the country. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you very much, Honorable Minister, for your opening comments. I am just worried because in spite of all the broad range of issues that you have addressed, you didn't talk about power. And I know that you cannot possibly run such a magnificent project without power supply. You can't have that industrialization you seek. How do you intend to get supply to the Ajokuta, industry? And then for all these people bringing in their monies, how do you intend to guarantee supply of power, which will be crucial to whatever it is that they are going to do?
Thank you very much, Victor. That's an important question. When I came into office, a few months later, I called my MD of Ajokuta and asked him that, these are the big plans that we want to put in place. How do we guarantee power supply, right? And I was assured on two things. One is that the national grid currently supplies power to Ajokuta. So Ajokuta is up and running in terms of power supply for 98% of the time, right? So we have power there in that community. It's a very important community. And if there was no power supply, the plant has been set up since 1979, 45 years ago, right? And the steel plant has been, for lack of a better word, comatose. It has not been operational. If there was no power supply ensuring that, some of the plants, and the water system around it is running effectively to keep the plant running, the plant would have sunk by now, right? So there is a significant amount of power that is being supplied to Ajokuta to at least keep the plant operational or keep the plant running. Otherwise, it's like if you park your car, and you don't start it for 45 years, even 1 month, when you come and start the car will not start, So those are some of the things. Then secondly, is what I mentioned around the thermal power plant public-private partnership arrangement, which we're trying to put in place to ensure that power is supplied to Ajokuta, and the power plant is up and running. All hands are on deck, across the country. The guys in, the Minister of Power, Chief Adelabu, is working day and night to ensure that from that side, those issues are also addressed. But we are resolving the Ajokuta power issues independently. Thank you.
Well, I was hoping, to be honest, that, you would say there is a plan to have an independent power supply, independent of the national grid.
Yeah.
And I say this because often and on you hear that the grid collapsed. You're not going to run an industry like that.
Yeah.
And if the grid is not, able to feed sufficiently every sector of the country, relying on that for this very important sector worries me.
Thank you, Victor. Let me just clarify again. Perhaps I wasn't extremely clear. So Ajokuta has 110 megawatts independent power plant
Okay.
that services Ajokuta alone.
Okay.
But beyond what it can supply to Ajokuta, there is an excess capacity that can also go onto the national grid.
Okay.
But that 110 megawatts currently is not running. So what needs to happen is we need to get into a PPP partnership, because we don't have the funding. We don't have the funding, but I'm not going to sit down and complain and cry to Nigerians that there are no funding. We have to think outside the box and figure out a solution, right? And also tell, my bosses, my leaders, explain the blueprint so that they can help me to raise the required financing for us to solve the problem.
Okay, thank you, Honorable Minister. Thank you. I think it's time for us to expand our conversation. So I'd like to bring in Dr. Okengwu, of course, himself, Technical Working Committee member, Mining, Agriculture and Water Resources Vision 2020 Committee. Dr. Okengwu, I don't know if the previous administration in their scorecard, especially for this sector, enumerated quite a number of things that had been done, in the sector. And if you also, the minister did talk about what President Tinubu, had been able to, attract in terms of investor willingness to, explore the steel sector. What are your views? Are we moving forward at all in this sector?
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to sit with the Honorable Minister. Let me start with the politics of steel. Maybe it can give us some clarity and probably present the huge challenge that the Honorable Minister will need to be facing going forward. Steel didn't just happen to Nigeria. There was a deliberate program in 1958, before we even got independence, for us to look for a way, an industrial pathway that could be able to make us an industrial nation in the shortest possible time. And in that 1958 agreement, it was now agreed that it was only steel, that if we were able to build a steel plant for Nigeria, that we were going to be one of the fastest growing economies. Why this background is important is that it helps you to appreciate, the challenges, because I'm sure that as we drill down, we're going to be asking one question: how come after all these years, every minister comes and says he's going to do this and nothing is happening? Now, in trying to look for that program to happen, the Nigerian government practically went around the whole world and didn't get any help until they got to Russia. But the truth and the interesting part of this story is at the moment Russia agreed that they could build a steel plant for Nigeria, the European Investment Bank, within 2 years, funded the another steel plant in Delta. So that was when...
Alaja, perhaps.
Beautiful. But in understanding steel, the Honorable Minister said that steel is the bedrock of development, that industrialization. But in real fact, steel is development and development is steel. Okay? There is nothing you can do in development without steel. And if you look at those countries that had gone from 0 to 100, like in the Middle East, what they did was that they increased their consumption of steel. China became, the world's biggest economy, okay, by just, focusing on their steel sector. They started producing infrastructure, making infrastructure faster than they could make a milkshake. Now let's get back to Nigeria so that we can get a perspective to this, Victor. When Ajokuta came, there were 3 other plants that came with Ajokuta. So the whole idea was Ajokuta was supposed to be a basic industries facility, not necessarily a steel plant, but had steel plants in it. One of the components of Ajokuta, which is why people keep talking about this 2% of Ajokuta that is not completed, is actually that 2%, it's more operational than it is technical. All right? Remember that the minister had mentioned liquid steel. So the whole idea is liquid steel. Liquid steel is the secret, behind steel production. And what we have in Nigeria, was a plant or is a plant that could be back integrated, to do 5.6 million metric tons of liquid steel. And then turn those things into billets that will now be rolled into steel products in the 4 rolling plants. Ajokuta, the one in Castina, Batagrawa, the one in Jos, the one in Oshobo, and then the one in Alaja. So if you don't have this full picture, you might not understand, the challenges that the Honorable Minister and his team are actually facing, okay, in trying to get this thing right. Because everybody says, okay, fine, good talk, but how come it's not happening? Now, the question of liquid steel is now where your raw materials now come into play. The Honorable Minister had mentioned the National Steel Raw Materials Exploration Agency, which was established specifically to look for steel, search for steel raw materials. That was their job. And they had done a lot of job in the days. But with the enactment of the Ministry of Mines and Steel, a lot of things have changed, which if you don't look more deeply, you can't be able to see them. There are a lot of now fault lines that are now happening. The first fault line is that you no longer have the National Steel Raw Material Exploration Agency as an exclusive agency that can go to anywhere and look for raw materials for steel and stockpile them. You now have a ministry that needs to issue licenses, okay, and that ministry is not under the purview and control of the Honorable Minister. Fault line number 1. Now, you have another agency, that is called the Nigerian Geological Survey Agency.
Yes.
That is also not under the control or purview of the Honorable Minister. Fault line number 2. Remember that we're trying to link this to liquid steel. Because the moment the Honorable Minister gets investors, the first question they're going to ask him is, how are you going to be assuring us, okay, on the sustainability of the supply of raw materials? Are you following me?
Yeah.
But in the areas that he has enumerated, like the light mill, you don't need liquid steel to be able to run the light mill, which he's ready and willing to run, very quickly. But if we're going to be going through the whole value chain, okay, of the steel industry, he had mentioned, 3 agencies that are very critical. Now, for me, one of the most important there will be the MTI. Now, the MTI is called the Meteorological Training Institute that was donated to Nigeria by the German government in the 60s, equipped. What was that institute supposed to be doing? It was supposed to now be developing the human capital required to be able to now run, the value process of the steel industry, meaning exploration, metallurgy, et al. And again, it's important you note that the steel industry or the mine industry is broken into 3 broad perspectives that are very, very synergized. What you call the minerals, the metals, and then the steel. Now, if you have a delink, albeit even by way of policy, like I'm trying to say now, because for the Honorable Minister to assure that we're going to be getting 5.6 million tons of liquid steel, he will be requiring to get a minimum of 15 million metric tons of raw materials of 7 different minerals into Ajokuta. Now, that's a logistical nightmare. Okay.
You know, Dr. Kengo, I'm sorry, we'll have to pause because the minister would have to take his leave in the next few minutes.
Oh, sorry.
Yes,
okay.
So we'll just allow him to give us more perspectives. Yes, and I mean, I remember my history very well. Steel drove the second industrial revolution, where rail, bridges, and all that, happened. Can we still, can this happen for us, especially with the Daikon Act?
Yes, Claire. The short answer is an absolute yes. I believe Mr. President, being a visionary, understands that to get Nigeria back on track and to make Nigeria one of the G20 economies, meaning one of the 20 biggest economies in the world, steel is a very important component. And something I want to sort of touch on, which Dr. Emeka mentioned earlier, is the other steel rolling mills. the Oshogbo Steel Rolling Mill, the Jos Steel Rolling Mill, and the Katsina Steel Rolling Mill. And part of my visit to all the agencies and all the government-owned plants or former government-owned plants includes some of these visits. So I was in the Jos Steel Rolling Mill recently, which has a new name now. Also, Delta Steel in Alaja is also an important component. And I think part of what we're doing as part of the roadmap is to review some of those, privatization that has taken place, to see what we can do additionally as a government to make those entities function. What has happened is that there was a privatization that took place under the Obasanjo administration. These companies were privatized and they were all, for lack of a better word, or mostly locked up. So a lot of them are not functional, and that is not in the best interest of Nigeria. So what do we need to do as a government to put some of these measures in place? That's a very, very important component. The second thing that is also important that I wanted to talk about is Ajokuta being 98% complete and there's a 2% portion left.
No.
What had happened was when the Russians moved out in 1994, precisely about 30 years ago, it was at the time 98% complete. But when you don't start a car for 30 years, of course you deteriorate. So what has happened is there needs to be a technical audit for us to determine what level of completion it's at currently. So there's a lot of work to be done.
That's why I said it's a long-term thing.
Yes, it's a long-term thing, but Mr. President has said that we should use a collegiate approach. Let's not wait for a big bang approach that addresses the whole problems all at the same time. Where are the low-hanging fruits? What can you fix now to give Nigerians confidence that we're on the right track and Ajokuta can work? Which is why Mr. President gave his personal approval for us to source 35 billion naira or $25 million from a local financial institution. We're just at the final stages. Once that is done, we could get the light steel mill running in the next 9 months. Or maximum a year, but I think
do we hold you on this? Do we hold you on this?
I think that's the target.
Okay.
That's the target. It's difficult to hold me on it because all the critical factors required for that to happen is not entirely within my control.
Precisely.
Right. So the financing, has to be signed off by the Ministry of Finance as well as MOFI. I've spoken to the Ministry of Finance, Mr. Wale Edun, like I mentioned. I've also spoken to the Chief Executive of Ministry of Finance Incorporated, MOFI, Dr. Armstrong. So I'm in discussions with all the critical stakeholders. But the target is we can get the plant, the light steel mill, up and running within the next 9 months by the special grace of God, assuming we have the financing today.
That's the target. But just before we let you go, he talked about the fault lines, which could also present, as a big challenge for you to achieve, your targets. Those areas that are not within, your supervision, but you really need to collaborate.
Yes, I think. First of all, I have a very, very good and close working relationship with the Minister of Solid Minerals, Dr. Alake. We speak. I won't say daily, we speak weekly, almost. We share the same office. So I can have a conversation with him on certain things that needs to be put in place and all of that. Part of what we need to find a solution for is all the steel raw materials that are required to make steel or steel components needs to be carved out under the Ministry of Steel Development for ease of action and operation. And I think the methodological industry bill addresses some of those things. So we're making a good progress. But I have a very, very good working relationship with the Minister of Solid Minerals, and we will get it right. Mr. President will get it right. I'm very confident that within 8 years, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu will turn around Nigeria something that Nigerians will be very, very proud of. And he has started it. You know, from yesterday, a lot of people didn't understand why, you know, the national anthem was changed. But Mr. President has said it's a call to service, it's a call to patriotism. You know, he's demanding from Nigerians that every Nigerian must contribute their own quota, you know, to the national development. You don't have to be a minister or a governor or a president to make a difference. You can make a difference even from the studio here. The cameraman can make his own contribution to the proper running of Nigeria by reporting this conversation correctly. So everybody has a contribution to make. Thank you very much.
All right, just as we let you go, Honorable Minister, I would like to thank you for coming. It's understandable that at this time you, like others, may have a crowded calendar.
Yes.
But I want you to take this on board, even if you don't have the time to respond. The skills gap, you know, in bringing all of these things together again to work, how you intend to fill the skills gap, even if you don't have the time to respond.
Yeah, I think
It's something I want
you
you
have
to
just
put
2
in.
minutes.
Yes, I'll just respond finally. That's an important question, and that would be resolved with the Methodological Training Institute, where even foundry operators, small-scale operators, SME operators across the value chain of the steel industry can be trained, can be upskilled, and all of that. All the concessionaires that are coming in, part of the agreement, the legal agreements that will be signed, would ensure skill transfer to Nigerians, both the engineers and even beyond that. So that is going to be factored into the conversations going forward. Thank you very much.
All right, Honorable Minister of Steel Development, well, we really like to thank you very much for finding time to join us, despite your scheduled, crowded schedule. Indeed, you had wanted, your team wanted us to let you go at 8,
Yes.
but you graciously gave us 15 more minutes.
Thank you very much.
But I hope we will get you to come here to really speak more on these issues.
Thanir you, Claire.
All right,
Thank you, Victor.
yes.
Thank you.
All
right,
right. And so as the minister takes his leave, we just engage our guest via Zoom from Okene, Alhaji Shuaib Musa, who is a pioneer deputy general manager of the Ajaokuta Steel Company. Alhaji, I don't know if you can give us a sense of what was at the time. The minister spoke about 98% completion at the time and 2% left. What exactly was the case, and how did we get to where we are at the moment?
Thank you very much. That is a very, very important question. It is a great pity indeed that after more than 50 years of the steel project, we are still talking about plans to make it complete. It is not that I'm not happy to hear some of the laudable plans that the Honorable Minister has explained to us this morning. But in view of the experience we've had in the past, what we've heard from so many ministers before, what some of the presidents of this country have told us before about revitalizing the steel industry, and at the end of the day, nothing happened. I'm sorry to say I'm a bit worried. I'm pessimistic, and I'm just praying that maybe this time around, Nigeria is going to get it right. It is a great pity because some countries that we started the steel industry with over 50 years ago, like Malaysia, India, those countries are on a very, very higher pedestal of economic development now. And in the case of Nigeria, we are still 98% completion. I remember in the year 2007, I was fortunate.
Wow.
Umaru Musa Yaradua. He sent for me. We were, and after the normal pleasantries, I raised the issue of Ajakuta, and he said, "I'm sorry, senior. Issue of Ajakuta, so much money has been pumped into it, and nothing to show for it." He was speaking the truth, But then I told him that yes, he was quite right, but you should realize that there was high politics in Ajakuta steel industry. There is the politics of international community. There is the politics of national community. And then, of course, the local community, And unless there is the political will to address these challenges posed by unless you have the political will to solve all these challenges posed by this international community, especially, we will still be talking about 98% completion. In the case of Ajakuta, when the project was conceived, the West were against it. They said that the raw materials of Ajakuta, was below standard. It was Russia that came out. That was during the time of the Cold War. It was Russia that came out and said, no, Nigeria raw materials for developing steel are quite good, even better than the ones they have in Russia. And we gave them the opportunity, and they were able to prove it. So the issue, unless we solve the issue of international conspiracy, if we don't solve it, I don't see how we are going to be able to. The plans are very laudable, but along the line, something else can happen. But we've had this time and again, and there is need to have a political will to make it work right now.
Thank you, Alhaji Shuaibu Musa, for your contribution, and indeed, we're hoping that your connection will be much stable so that we can get a lot out from your end. But in the meantime, let's put you on hold and return to the studio here. Sorry, to Lagos, where Professor David Sezobo is Professor of Extractive Metallurgy and Zero Waste Technology. You must have listened to the minister and what Alhaji Shuaibu, have talked about, especially his opinion on what is still holding down Ajaokuta, from coming to fruition. Do you think that we can address that fundamental issue that he raised, which is, borders on what he calls conspiracy? I don't know. Is there anything like international conspiracy against Ajaokuta?
Yeah, thank you very much. And also, let me just a little bit give some of the sentiment that the Honorable Minister actually raised. Now, I believe that, that is my conception. I believe that Nigeria has not actually, at this very moment, taken the state capacity, the liquid state capacity and its consumption, taking it as a rule of thumb index for economic and military power, which should be generously guided. Now, the Honorable Minister mentioned about the invitation of local institutions to revitalize the light means this set of that Ajaokuta. So these are part of what has happened before. These are things conceptual processes that have taken place so far, many of them, and they all woefully collapsed because instead of even raising the hope that the state sector will come up on board, it's either the investors or the investors, the other strip of our national wealth or assets. Now, he did mention also, rightly mentioned that what they ought to have done first, they didn't do that, but they went to this concessional aspect of the program. Now, the first thing, and if you want actually Ajaguta to come up on board, is to invite, that is the first thing, is to buy the original builder of this sector, the owner of the technology. And he mentioned that it's just 2%, and that is correct. It's a technical completion of Ajaguta. And what are these 2%? They are the primary unit that actually we convert the iron ore, the raw material, into liquid steel, which is the steel making and the iron making and the steel making that really needs to be completed. And what is left in the iron making is the upper part of the blast furnace, which actually control the eternal technology of that process that is left uncompleted. If actually we want, because these are what happened with past ministers and past government, this concessional process, but they are trying using a different method. It's still the same privatization concession process, which I'm not a prophet of doom. It will also come to the same story. But if we invite the original builder, if we close our eyes and say, okay, other builder will help us, it will not do the right thing, because steel industry itself is international industry. And whatever that is happening in Nigeria, every other country is interested. And so the people who have actually given us this opportunity to have our steel base, the metal base, because it's actually, as Irati mentioned, is the bedrock of industrialization. We should jealously. He mentioned about just $2 billion that is required. And that $2 billion, it can be sourced. Because I was among those that wrote, developed 69-page framework for effective and efficient organization or planning, organization, supervision, regulation and monitoring of the sector that will actually lead to the development and growth of that metal sector. And among that, also we mentioned about the financing. In that bill, there is also a section or articles that are related to how this can be funded. It will not require money from the government, just like the Egyptians. Egyptians went on and what they did, to the extent that ordinary farmer can buy assets of their steel industry. The steel industry, well, I know the steel industry in Egypt is run by the government. And that can be done also. It is there in that 69-page framework. Now, he mentioned about power supply. Look, power supply, Ajakuta has the capacity, is self-sufficient in power supply, and it also can give out of what he has produced. Now, what people don't really understand, what people are always saying, before anything, someone can get something done, that you have to first think about power supply. But I think otherwise. It is actually the metal base that you're supposed to come first before the power supply. Because even when you acquire power supply from anywhere, you cannot sustain it without metal base. And that is why this sector should be jealously guided, and whatever means to ensure that that liquid steel, the crude steel production and its capacity is actually enhanced and allowed to come to fruition. And that is what actually I wanted to actually talk to the honorable minister and also the doctor that is with you there at the studio. He actually mentioned one vital issue about taking different ministry now having different authority over some of the things that are actually related to metal industry. I'm talking about metal industry now, which includes also iron and steel industry. To the extent that you have a Ministry of Mines, Ministry of Solid Minerals, and you have a Ministry of Steel. And those that actually that need to be before. Look, okay, I just want to mention before I forget. Look, even if we tomorrow complete Ajakuta and we want to start, and the raw material bids are not there, we still remain where we are. And that is why, apart from even looking at the generality of having a steel production, we should also talk about the solid mineral base, because today we are exporting them. We are allowing people to mine, and they export the raw material without value added, without even doing a semi conversion of those raw material. And tomorrow, when we will start the steel industry, we may not have the solid mineral there. That is another issue. That is why I am making just before I say a little recommendation. Now, in order to harness this sector or these ministries, there is a need to create that body. It's not the Nigerian State Council, the body that will actually stand a little bit independent per se, but under the supervision of the ministry.
All right.
Victor.
Some vital points that we'll get Dr. Kengu here in the studio to respond to, which will be after this particular break. All right, you're welcome back. Thank you for staying with us on Good Morning Nigeria, where we have been discussing the steel sector as part of commemoration of the first anniversary of this current administration. And just before we went on break, the prof from the University of Lagos was making some points. Before him, Alhaji, Shaibu was talking about, the international conspiracy, which you alluded to earlier. But question is, how are we likely to overcome this? And what are the chances? The minister mentioned 8 years, that even in 8 years, we could get the Ajaokuta steel industry running.
Thank you very much. I'd rather not call it international conspiracy. I'd rather call it politics of international economic relations. Now, what's the difference? Now, when you talk about politics of international economic relations, you're talking about countries protecting their turf.
Their own business, yeah.
Now, remembering that it was the same steel that led to the subprime mortgage. It was money that China raised from steel and infrastructure that they used in practically destroying or collapsing the economy of Europe. To the extent that at one time, they started even bidding to buy the Pentagon. Remember. To the extent that at one time, 80% of the cars being driven in America and Europe were all coming, from Asia. The Toyotas, which they now didn't want to call it Toyota and started calling it a Lexus. Okay, the Avalons. These are all, cars that they just, like you said,
just like dressed.
Now, it's also important for me to say that Ajaokuta was built in Nigeria. Every component of Ajaokuta was actually, built in Nigeria in what they call their engineering workshop or their base workshop. So Nigerians were fully involved in the establishment of Ajaokuta. And in that base workshop or engineering workshop, it is still there, or erection base rather. That's what it's called. Now that erection base was where every component of Ajokuta, was built. But each time people talk about Ajokuta and are focusing on steel, they tend to miss it. Because Ajokuta, like the minister said, has 44 independent, as it were, industries. In fact, inside Ajokuta, you have 4 cement industries that can produce cement. You have a lime industry, 100% completed, that can produce hydrated lime. You have a workshop there that can retrofit every and any transformer in Nigeria today. Retrofit from start to finish. So, but if you're going to be looking at steel as a basis of development and then being able to be graded, okay, because international development is actually graded against your steel consumption. Okay, the percentage of steel you consume. And if you look at our consumption today, if we're talking about infrastructure, infrastructure expenditure takes over 85% of our national budget. Because talking about steel and allied products. Let's start with the table in front of us here. You're seeing a glass table, but it's really a glass table. Would this table be standing here without the steel sections? Look at the chairs you're sitting on. You might be surprised that the base could also have some kind of steel structure. Look at this building that we are. You look around and you see bricks. But the foundation is steel.
And the pillars.
The pillars are steel. So when they talk about steel being everything, but in trying to deal with this international conspiracy or politics, which is a direct question you asked me, it's very simple. We need to build these synergies, that I had mentioned. Yes, it was a good thing to have separated, the 2 ministries. But even amongst, in the ministry itself now, you have 4 or 5 major agencies. All right? Now, the first agency and the second agency, I think 3 of them are under the control of the senior minister. Then the other 2 are under the supervision of the junior minister or the minister of state. Okay? Now, by law, both of them are supposed to, be on equal, standing. And this is where, building that synergy. The first synergy will be to build a block where, like, when me and you were growing up, okay, our parents, did it. If you go to your mom, there was no phones then. Your mom will tell anybody where your father was. Okay, so if we had the ministry, first and foremost, closing gaps. There's even another critical agency that is completely out of the ministry I didn't mention. And each time I come here, I try to bring them in. The Raw Materials Research Development Council has more statistics on mineral resources in Nigeria than the 2 ministries were talked about, or maybe as much. Okay, so if you want us to, control this international conspiracy, you're also now having the issues of the subnationals who are now every day, issuing executive orders, taking over their mineral resources, So you must be able to build that back end. And in building that back end, you must build it against front ends. Let me go to the front end now, Claire. Look at the rail line that we're building. Imagine if Ajokuta was given a contract to supply 30% of the rail tracks on the coastal range. The money that the minister is talking about will be peanuts. Now, against that contract, they can actually now go to any bank and say, because we've been given this contract, if Ajokuta as an agency was given the contract to supply maybe 10 million electric poles, if Ajokuta was given, the contract, to make 10 million gas, these gas cylinders. I'm just giving you very practical things that can happen. Then you would not need that, but you need to have a business model, which is why it's good that you have an investment banker as a minister who understands transactions. And then you have a president who also now, understands it better to say, I want the business out of this place. But in making that business out of the place, you will need to go to that 2% everybody is talking about. The 2% that is left uncompleted. Okay? Like I said, I was involved in the technical, review of Ajokuta at one time, some time ago. That 2% has more to do with the operational cost of Ajokuta. How are you running your raw materials? And you need, let me also say this, for public information. The furnace in Ajokuta requires 180 days to start. 180 days, please mark my words, and it must run for 5 years non-stop. And then if you're going to be producing 1.5 million metric tons of liquid steel, you'll be needing 7.5 million metric tons of raw materials on an annual basis non-stop for 5 years. So that would be 7.5. So you're talking about 30 million or something like that. Metric tons that must be on ground before you start that plant. Those are all part of those 2%. And then you're talking about the logistics of moving your materials. There was a lot of problems in dredging the Niger. Okay, at one time, just like you had with the coastal rail line now, a lot of oil pipelines, so they couldn't dredge it. Now they now started deciding to now build the rail track. So these are all, the issues that can help you.
You know, the prof from Lagos, Accessible, talked about, or is it Accessible or Shuaibu? Yes, talked about. I was emphatic on his suggestion that there is need for Nigeria to stick to the original manufacturers or original company, that's the Russians, who developed our Jakarta steel, in addressing the issue of, I don't know what you called it, but it's conspiracy theories,
yes.
Concerning this Jakarta. So even if all the gaps that you've mentioned are addressed, and we have this, external, exogenous, factors coming into play, we will still go back to square one. And that's why, please, I would like you, Dr. Kembu, to enumerate, streamline for us, how that aspect of the problems in the steel sector can be addressed. Okay. What needs to be done, number one? What can we do, number two, to at least address that part, and then we'll look at the other.
All right, first and foremost,
internal parts.
We need to redefine Russia, because the Russia of today was not the Russia that signed that contract. Okay, it was USSR. Mm-hmm. And the company, TPE, is actually Ukrainian. It's not Russian as of today. Okay. And they had come. TPE had come. Okay? Now, the major problem you had was that when the manual of Ajokuta was written in Ukrainian Russian. So the first thing we should now be able to do is to be able to now interpret, translate that manual so that it can be in plain and simple English. However, the technology of steel is, if you know about goldsmithing, is basically basic, as it were. Like I said to you, it requires 3 basic things. Basic thing number 1 is availability of your raw materials. 1. Okay. For a plant that uses a blast furnace that you're going to be running for 5 years. So you must stock it up. You don't wait and say, Victor, where are you people now? Let's wait. No, you must load it up. 1. Second problem or issue will be the problem of power.
Good.
Now, the third will be your off-taker.
Fine.
Because if you don't have an off-taker problem, this is where Russia is beating everybody to it, and this is where they're doing everything to make certain that you don't get competitive. How do I mean? They put a lot of subsidies on their steel, okay, so that they sell, at very cheaply. You can get very cheap steel, so that they can keep, their mills running and their people, working. Now, if you don't now understand that part of what we need to do is to take a national policy to say whatever it is that has steel or steel component on it, 30% of it will come from, our steel sector, not necessarily Ajokuta. Imagine a situation, I'll give you an instance now. But one of the major challenges we're facing today as a country is the challenge of food insecurity. Now, what are the reasons people are giving? Mm-hmm. People can't go to the farms. It's very pedestrian in this day and time where you can start producing greenhouses. Claire, Victor, imagine if we dedicated the Katsina Steel Mill to the production of greenhouses. Victor, we dedicated the one in Jos to the construction of sprinklers. We dedicated the one in Oshobo to the construction of farm implements. And you are now supplying these steel mills, with the rolling materials, flat sheets, that you need to produce these things. There is nothing. This is why, if you understand the politics, it is more local, okay, than it is international.
Good. I wanted you to clarify that for us so we know where we're going. Victor, you want to
Yeah,
get
because
to Shuaibu?
I'm not sure how much international politics will stall, revamping the Ajaokuta steel industry. But that's why I want to get to Alhaji Shuaibu Musa again in Okene. We are running out of time, by the way, but to tell us how we can overcome all of the hurdles before us to get Ajaokuta running again.
Thank you very much. Like I said before, when I met with late President Musa Yar'Adua, he asked me exactly this question: how do you think we can overcome the problem of Ajaokuta? And I told him, Your Excellency, the original builders of Ajaokuta still are the Russians. We know them and we know their attitude to work. Originally, they came to Nigeria to prove a point, and that was the time of the Cold War, that what the Western people, what the Western countries said is not possible, is possible, and that they should be given an opportunity to prove the point. They were given the opportunity, and they worked very, very well. Even times without number, when they were owed a lot of money, they continued working. But that could not happen with other international companies like Dumez, Fujero, Julius Berger. Once you are owing them, they down tools until you pay them. But for the Russians, they continued working for many years until they were virtually forced out by our Nigerian attitude. There was a time, I understand, that the Russians were ready to come to Nigeria and do a BOT, build, operate, and transfer. I think if that can be arranged, that would be the best way to solve the problems of funding that we have and all other problems, because we will not need to put in much money. Now, according to the minister, we need to source for money from here and there and there. We are not unlikely to have hitches in this regard. But if we go by the BOT, the Russians, the original builders, they will come in, they will finish the work and make sure the plant is running very well. And the Nigerians will learn from them until such a time when Nigerians can take over, or as per the agreement of the BOT. I think that is the only practical thing that we should do. Ask them to come, let's do a BOT, and then when it is time, they can hand over to us, and they would have gotten there again, and we too, they would have completed our steel industry for us. I think that is the way I will advocate. Thank you.
Alhaji Shuaibu, and that reminds me of an old adage that we are all familiar with that tells us charity begins at home, and I think that's what Professor Kingwu is trying to tell us. That first, again, because of the very evolving nature of our ecospace of world today, first to address the aspect of conspiracy theories, we must also look at what has happened, in the world history, and know the place of, Russia today and the USSR in the days when the contract on Ajaokuta was signed. But again, he also said, look, the most important thing is availability of your raw materials. So we must address that, and that is our internal problem. What policy framework and infrastructural needs do you think that we will need to put in place at the moment to address the internal gaps that are involved in all of this?
Well, one that I can think about clearly is the issue of the ministry. I think the ministry supervising Ajaokuta Steel, the steel needs to be to have an independence of its own, because from my own experience, some people from outside can use delaying tactics of people in the ministry to, disorganize the work that is going on in the steel sector. I want to advocate for a steel ministry that exists on its own, outside the umbrella of the ministry, because there are certain experts, Nigerian experts, who can be used or who are being used by some outside countries who don't want Nigeria steel to come up. And the reason why they don't want Nigeria's steel to come up is that once Nigeria steel comes up, then we are likely to have the whole of the African market. And that is very strategic. They don't want that. They want to keep having the whole of the steel market. And if Nigeria steel should come up, that will, reduce their own market as well. And that is the reason why I think we should do as I have said just now.
All right, thank you very much, Alhaji Shaibu. Thank you. Let's quickly go to Lagos to see Professor Esezobor. Prof, thank you very much for your patience. And as a closing remark, I just want you to respond in the same vein. How do you think we can overcome challenges and get the Ajaokuta steel, Nigeria steel industry, up and running?
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah, I think I agree with Alhaji Habib. We actually need an independent body that will be under the auspices of the presidency, not under the bureaucracy of any ministry. That will be solely in charge of the steel development in this country. That is only where we can actually come out. Remember when before the steel industry was placed under the ministry, we had what we call Nigeria National Steel Council. That was an independent body, and that was why there was so many development that took place. They were the one that actually did organizing. A lot of things came up with all their, long-term program and so on. But when it was now placed under the ministry, everything collapsed. So I agree with that. And I just want us to remember that in 2019, I need to mention this, 2019, there was actually a meeting in Sochi in Russia, where the president of Russia agreed to give us $2 billion to complete Ajaokuta. But unfortunately, instead of making a follow-up to that, we went ahead to invite a consultant somewhere else, a Canada consultant, and thereby we paid a lot of dollars, and at the end of the day, nothing happened. Today, that money.
Professor David Esezobor, thank you. Let me just quickly take 60 seconds from Dr. Kengwu here before we do our appreciations to all of you. Dr. Kengwu, do you agree that an independent, ministry or agency under the supervision of the presidency should be set up for steel?
No, what I agree we should do is to have what you call a project development support system, where the relevant agencies, can come together to support, the three elements. Element number one, raw materials aggregation. Okay, those agencies that should come together will be the Mining Cadastre Office, the Nigerian Geological Survey Agency, the National Steel Raw Materials Research Exploration Agency, and maybe the Solid Minerals Development Fund. That will be for raw materials aggregation. Okay. Now, it should be, like you said, an ecosystem, a support system. The second will be power. Now, you also now need to now look at all your sources of power to be able to now support alternative and major, gas, coal, renewables, hydro, all which are within Abuja. That's solved. The third will be your marketing. And in the marketing aspect now will be where government will need to now take a policy. And that's where the minister comes to play. To say, let us begin to now push this policy where anything that has to do with steel and allied products, okay, you cannot import more than 70% of what we need in the country. A minimum of 30% must go to Ajokuta, and then you begin to now, aggregate as the years goes by. So that in 10 years, as part of his development plan, at the 10th year, we'll now, or 5th year, or 6th year, we'll now start exporting to other people.
All the support agencies will all equally require funding and resources, and again, boost.
No, but
it's a long walk.
You see, with institute value, let me tell you, Claire, sorry. You can actually raise $10 billion by just doing your coal resources institute. And
all right. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. Ajaokuta will take a long time. The conversations around it will also require, long talk. But Dr. Meko Kengu, member, National Technical Working Group, Mining, Agriculture, and Water Resources, Vision 2020 Committee. We'd like to thank you very much for your time on the program. Let's also quickly thank from Okene, who joined us from Okene via Zoom, Alhaji Shuaibu Musa, Pioneer Deputy General Manager at the Ajaokuta Steel Company. Thank you for coming on Good Morning Nigeria.
Thank you.
We're joined by Professor David Esezobo, Professor of Extractive Metallurgy and Zero Waste Technology, former head of Department of Metallurgical and Materials Engineering. Prof, we appreciate your time and thoughts.
Thank you very much.
In Good Morning Nigeria, we thank you very much for watching. I'm Victor, as well. See you again tomorrow.
And I'm Claire Adelabu Abdurazak. Bye-bye.